He mocked her in front of the entire boardroom. "Translate this and I'll give you my salary." But when the poor cleaning lady recited every word perfectly, his smirk vanished. She had a secret he never saw coming, one that could destroy his pride or save his soul. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow, we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The floor of Blackwood Enterprises headquarters shimmered beneath the overhead lights, polished to a mirror-like finish that reflected every click of designer heels and every glint of ambition. Most people didn't notice the person who made that shine possible, but today, someone would. Isabella Ruiz knelt quietly beside the elevator bank, her bucket of supplies at her side, headphones tucked beneath her dark curls. She was wiping down the chrome edges of the marble walls when the sound of laughter pulled her attention toward the glass conference room nearby. Inside, a group of men in sharp suits stood encircling Damien Blackwood, tall, commanding, immaculately dressed, and known across the city for his ruthless intellect and sharper tongue. His voice carried easily, a smooth, rich baritone tinged with condescension. "L'étranger sans compassion ne quote rentable," he said, then chuckled. "But I doubt anyone in this room actually speaks." The board members faked knowing nods. A few laughed nervously. One attempted to parrot the phrase and mangled it completely. Isabella, pausing her task, looked up. She knew exactly what he'd said. Damien stepped out into the hallway, his phone in one hand and coffee in the other. He caught sight of her. She was already looking away, brushing a smudge from the marble. "You there," he called out, a smirk forming on his lips. Isabella straightened, her heart kicking against her ribs. "Yes, sir." He tilted his head, studying her. "Tell me, did you understand what I just said in that room?" She blinked. "Yes." He raised an eyebrow. "Really? Then translate it." Isabella hesitated. Around them, a few interns had paused to eavesdrop. A couple of board members had poked their heads out. Damien's tone turned mocking. "I'll give you my salary for the day if you can translate it correctly." The hallway went silent. A cruel joke, a dare dressed up as generosity. Isabella met his gaze, her voice calm but steady. "You said, strategy without compassion is just a profitable form of cruelty." A beat of silence. Damien's smirk faltered. One of the interns gasped audibly. He recovered quickly, lips curling. "Impressive. Did someone teach you that line?" "I studied linguistics before my mother got sick," Isabella said softly. "I had to drop out." The truth sat there between them, simple, unadorned, and in no need of validation. Damien's expression tightened. "Well, I suppose even mop buckets have ears." The sting of the words didn't show on Isabella's face. She simply nodded and returned to her bucket. The silence was louder now. Damien turned, brushing past a stunned employee, and walked off. But behind his cold stride, something was shifting. Something he didn't understand. That night, Damien sat in his penthouse, the city skyline bleeding orange and indigo through the glass wall. He poured a drink, then paused, remembering her voice. Clear, unshaken, smart. He had mocked her, and she hadn't flinched. His mind, normally consumed with contracts and quarterly projections, kept circling back to her eyes. Worry, but not weak. Why did it bother him? He clicked his laptop open, bringing up employee files. She wasn't even in the corporate database, only in facilities, hired by contract. He slammed the laptop shut. She wasn't important. She cleaned floors. She wasn't his concern, and yet, she had spoken truth into a room full of sycophants. Isabella scrubbed the floor of the executive lounge the next morning, humming softly to herself. Her arms ached, but it was honest work. She'd been doing this since she was 15, after her mother's diagnosis forced her to abandon dreams of a university degree. But she never stopped learning. Books rescued from donation bins, podcasts played on an old borrowed phone, languages picked up from YouTube clips and forums. She didn't need applause, she just needed to survive. The elevator dinged, she looked up and froze. Damien Blackwood stepped out, alone. He wasn't supposed to be here this early. Her hands instinctively moved to gather her things. "You don't have to run," he said, pausing at the door. She didn't move. "I owe you a salary," he added, quieter now. "You don't," she said. "It was a joke. It wasn't funny," said Palm. For a moment, something raw flickered across his face. Shame? Uncertainty? Then it vanished, masked beneath his usual indifference. "I meant what I said," he replied, You translated it perfectly. I didn't do it for money. Why did you do it? She hesitated. Because I could. Emmy studied her again, like she was a riddle he couldn't solve. Do you always know when someone's mocking you? Always, she said. He nodded once, then turned and left. This time, Isabella didn't look away. She just watched him walk off, the weight of his gaze lingering behind him. Later that week, Damien found himself standing at the observation deck on the 44th floor, staring down at the city, but seeing only flashes of that hallway. He couldn't shake it, her words, her calm, her ability to look past power and see through arrogance. He ran meetings, drove decisions, dismissed everyone who didn't meet his pace, but she had met him without blinking. Sir, his assistant called, are we still going ahead with the merger announcement? He blinked, shook his head. Push it till next week. She blinked. But we're all ready. I said push it. The assistant nodded quickly and left. Damien stood still, then reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then he placed it back in his pocket. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure of anything. The next day began like any other for Isabella. She arrived early, just after sunrise, long before most executives would grace the building. The quiet hum of vacuum cleaners and soft mopping sounds echoed through the glass corridors, but something felt different, like a silent spotlight followed her. She tried to shake it off. These people didn't care about her. They never had, until him. She didn't even know why she'd spoken. Maybe it was the smugness in his voice, the way he used words as weapons. Or maybe it was because for once she could remind someone like him that intelligence didn't wear Prada heels or $1,000 watches. She hadn't expected it to matter. Yet it clearly had as she pushed her supply cart down the hallway. A soft voice, Isabella? She turned, startled. No one ever addressed her by name. Standing there was a young woman in a sharp navy suit. Anna, Damien Blackwood's assistant. Everyone in the building knew her. Efficient, unreadable, intimidating in her own right. Yes, Isabella said carefully. Mr. Blackwood would like to see you, now. Isabella's grip tightened on the handle of her cart. Why? I don't ask questions, I just deliver them. There was no point arguing. Isabella nodded slowly, wiped her hands, and followed Anna toward the executive elevator. The office on the top floor was silent, towering windows casting long shadows across the floor. Damien stood behind his desk, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up. He looked like someone who hadn't slept, still intimidatingly composed. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he was staring at the skyline again. She waited, arms folded, refusing to feel small. You said you studied linguistics, he finally said. Where? Riverdale Community College, before I dropped out. Why'd you drop out? My mother was diagnosed with ALS. Full-time care meant full-time work. He nodded once. And now you mop my floors. That's not shameful. I didn't say it was. A heavy silence stretched between them. She thought about turning to leave, but then he did something she didn't expect. He gestured to a chair. She hesitated, then sat. I've been thinking, he said. You embarrassed me. She lifted her chin. You embarrassed yourself? A breath, then he laughed, a small, startled sound that barely escaped his throat. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk. You're right. Another silence. I want to offer you something, he continued. Not charity, a job, a real one. Entry-level, corporate side, translation and communications. You're wasted on bleach and ammonia. Isabella stared at him, unsure whether to be insulted or intrigued. Because talent shouldn't be ignored. She narrowed her eyes. Or because your ego needs fixing. He looked at her then, really looked. Maybe both. She swallowed. Her heart was pounding now, not from fear, but from the shock of the moment. Was this a trap? A test? What's the catch? No catch, just one question. She waited. Do you want more? Isabella stood up, slowly, calmly. Everyone wants more, but I don't want it from someone who doesn't believe I deserve it. She turned toward the door and stopped. You want me to translate something real? She said. Try this. She looked him in the eye. Respect isn't given when convenient. It's given when no one's watching. And then she left, her footsteps sharp, her head high. Damien didn't stop her, but the look in his eyes had changed. Isabella returned to the locker room downstairs, hands shaking. She couldn't believe she had just said that, to Damien Blackwood, of all people. And yet, she didn't regret it. The door opened suddenly. Maria, a fellow cleaner in her 60s, peeked in. You okay, Mia? I think I just said something I wasn't supposed to. Maria chuckled. Good, maybe they'll start listening. But Isabella wasn't so sure. This world didn't bend for people like her. It cracked them when they tried. Still, for once, she had made someone like Damien Blackwood pause, and something told her that meant everything. Later that evening, Damien sat alone in his apartment again. The city pulsed beneath him, but his mind wasn't on stocks or statements, it was on her words. Respect isn't given when convenient. He had built his empire on fear, on sharp edges and silence. But she had sliced through it with nothing but truth. He opened his laptop, typed in a name. Isabella Ruiz. No LinkedIn profile, no resume in circulation, no glowing references, just a name in the system under janitorial. He closed the screen again, but her voice was still in his head, and for the first time in years, Damien Blackwood didn't feel like a master of the world. He felt like a man who had just been taught something real. Damien Blackwood never admitted when something bothered him, but ever since, Isabella translated his French challenge with quiet precision. A subtle disquiet had nested in his chest. It wasn't just her words, it was the way she didn't gloat, didn't beg, didn't even flinch under his power. So he devised a test. The next morning, as Isabella entered the 27th floor with her cleaning cart and worn gloves, she noticed something unusual. A leather-bound volume of Russian poetry sat open on the conference table, half translated, half not. No one was in sight. She hesitated, then resumed dusting, but when she reached the table, her fingers lingered on the page. It took her 4 minutes to quietly finish the translation on a napkin. 2 floors above, Damien watched through the security feed, expression unreadable. She passed then, a Latin memo on the copier. Each time she solved them without asking, and each time he grew more fascinated and more irritated. No resume, no title. Just brilliance in a cleaning uniform. Who is she? He asked his assistant one afternoon. Isabella Reyes, part-time night crew. No higher education on file. He tapped his pen. Interesting. That night, she found a manila envelope on her cart. Inside was a formal invitation to a multilingual initiative briefing on the executive floor. She blinked. Was this a mistake? But it had her name typed cleanly in bold. Isabella Reyes, language advisor. Her first instinct was suspicion. Then came something rarer, hope. She arrived to the meeting in modest slacks and a borrowed blazer from the shelter. As she stepped into the polished boardroom, a dozen men in suits turned, surprised. But Damien stood at the head of the table, utterly calm. "This is Isabella," he said coolly, newest contributor for international communications. Murmurs rippled. She expected hostility. Instead, silence. He tossed a French dossier her way. "You have 5 minutes." Her hands didn't tremble as she flipped through the document. 4 minutes later, she handed it back with notes, concise, flawless. The room went still. "Impressive," one board member muttered. Another cleared his throat. "Very." Damien's eyes didn't leave her. He nodded once. Meeting adjourned. As everyone filed out, someone muttered under their breath, "She still smells like bleach." Isabella caught it, face flushed, but before she could reply, Damien turned sharply toward the man. "Your cologne doesn't mask your ignorance," he said coldly. Silence. Isabella stared at Damien, unsure if she was more stunned or suspicious. "You didn't have to— I didn't do it for you," he cut her off, then paused. "But I should have done it sooner." She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. Back in the janitor's room that night, she exhaled, fingers pressed to her lips. For the first time in years, she felt seen, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched for the wrong reasons. The next morning, Damien passed her in the hallway. "Your corrections on the German memo. Official," he said quietly. "Was that another test?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he held open the elevator for her and she stepped in, hesitant. They stood in silence until the furious floor. She stared straight ahead. He watched her reflection in the mirror. "I don't like games," she said softly as the doors opened. "Neither do I," he replied, "but I admire those who can win them." The doors, and Isabella, without fail, kept catching them. But she never bragged. She simply returned each challenge with quiet dignity and a gaze that made him question his own intentions. Until one afternoon, he called her into his private office. She entered, warily. The room smelled of cedar and leather, walls lined with books he'd probably never read. At the center, Damien sat behind his monolithic desk, fingers steepled. "You've passed every test?" She remained standing. "I didn't realize I was being tested," she said softly. "That's what made it work," he replied. She eyed him carefully. Why me? Damien hesitated. I needed someone who doesn't just understand language, but understands power and how it's used. A beat of silence stretched between them. And you thought the cleaning lady would be flattered? Her voice didn't rise, but her eyes sharpened. Because I'm supposed to be grateful you saw me? He leaned forward slightly. Are you angry I saw you, or that others didn't? Her breath caught in her throat. Damien motioned toward the chair across from him. Sit. Isabella remained still. I came because I respect knowledge, not you. Something flickered in his eyes, not insulted, intrigued. He leaned back. There's a global project I've been assembling, language access for underdeveloped markets. I want you on it. Not as a token gesture, as a partner. I have 2 other jobs, she said. One of them keeps the lights on. Will match your total income? Her brow arched. Just like that? He offered a half smile. I'm not used to negotiating when I know I'm right. I'm not used to men offering things without a price tag. A silence fell between them again, tighter this time. Finally, she turned to leave. I'll think about it. He nodded. That's all I ask. That night, Isabella scrubbed floors with more force than usual. Her thoughts ran circles. Who was this man who mocked her but now offered her opportunity? Was it guilt, curiosity, or something else? At the shelter, she sat in her bunk with a cup of instant tea and stared at the ceiling. What if this was a door she wasn't supposed to walk through? What if walking away meant choosing pride over progress? But deep down, the part of her that had translated Latin poetry in the dark while her mother slept whispered, "You belong in rooms like that." The next day, she left a single sheet of paper on Damien's desk, her acceptance, terms included. When he found it, he smiled. Not out of triumph, but because, for once, someone wasn't afraid of him. Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side. Meetings, strategy calls, language panels. She translated with precision, suggested edits no one else would dare to bring. He stopped correcting her, started listening more. But one night, after a late meeting, Damien walked her to the lobby. You're different than anyone I've met here, he said. Looked ahead, not at him. That's because I didn't come here to impress. Still, he added, you leave an impression. She didn't respond. Silence said everything. A week later, at a company gala, Isabella attended in a simple black dress borrowed from a friend at the shelter. Her curls were brushed out, her face bare except for a touch of gloss. She looked elegant and out of place. The whispers followed her. Is it she? You clean up well, he teased. She took one glass, not smiling. And you don't, he chuckled, eyes lingering a moment too long. Later that evening, during his speech to the board, he pointed toward her mid-sentences. Thanks to Isabella Reyes, we've finally cracked the linguistic code that stalled our expansion in Brazil. Her work has redefined what this company considers qualified. She froze, the crowd turned. Applause, but Isabella didn't smile. She waited until the clapping died, then slipped out quietly. On the way home, she whispered to herself, I wasn't ready to be his exception. Back in his penthouse, Damien stared at the untouched glass she left behind on the gala table. Something was changing, and he couldn't name it. Not yet, but the tension had become undeniable. The invitation came folded in thick ivory cardstock, left inconspicuously on the breakroom counter beside the cleaning supplies. At first, Isabella thought it was a mistake, meant for someone else. But her name was there, printed in clean, expensive serif. Ms. Isabella Reyes, cordially invited to the Blackwood & King's annual winter gala. Her first instinct was to throw it away. The gala was a sanctuary for polished people in tailored suits, not janitors with calloused hands and borrowed shoes. But then she noticed the note scribbled at the bottom in black ink. Need translation support. Urgent. Damien Blackwood. Of course, she sighed, folding the invitation back neatly and slipping it into her coat pocket like a secret. He was doing it again, testing her, pushing her into places she didn't belong, or maybe inviting her into them. That evening, a box arrived at her door. Inside was a sleek black gown, minimalist but undeniably elegant, along with a pair of simple silver heels. No card, no explanation. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the dress, until her best friend, Maritza, barged in with a grin. Proud if you don't put that on, I will wear it myself and pretend to be you. Isabella laughed weakly. It's ridiculous. I'll look like a costume at a museum. No, you'll look like a woman who deserves to take up space. Maritza crossed her arms. And if he invited you, go. You spent your life hiding your light. Maybe it's time you let someone see it. So she did. The hotel ballroom was dripping in gold and crystal. Chandeliers shimmered like frozen waterfalls, and violins played softly under the low hum of power brokers clinking glasses and exchanging half-smiles. She stepped in quietly, heart hammering, unsure if she was walking into a dream or a disaster. Eyes turned, conversations paused, whispers traveled faster than she could process them. When he saw her, his posture shifted subtly. He excused himself and walked straight toward her, stopping inches away. "You clean up well," he murmured. She looked up at him, her voice calm. "And you lie well?" A slow grin touched his lips. "You're late. You didn't say I had to be. On time." He held out his arm. "Shall we translate the night together?" She took it, not smiling, but not resisting either. Moved through the crowd like an odd painting, his sharp suit, her soft elegance, and an invisible current between them that neither dared acknowledge. People whispered louder now. One woman in a velvet gown leaned toward her date and muttered, "Did she sneak in from the service elevator?" Isabella pretended not to hear. But Damien did. An hour into the evening, the tension finally snapped. A senior executive, already 3 drinks in, stumbled toward them with a laugh. "Blackwood," he slurred, "who's the +1? New PR strategy? Bring help to work day." The crowd chuckled nervously. Isabella stiffened. Her throat closed. Damien didn't laugh. "She's here on my invitation," he said coldly. "If you ever speak like that again, you'll be issuing press releases from a basement in Idaho." Laughter died. The executive blinked, then walked away muttering. Isabella turned her face away. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said, "because I brought you into this room, and I will not let anyone dishonor that." But still, the walls closed in. Her chest tightened with every glance, every half-handed smirk. She slipped out to the balcony without a word. The winter air hit her like truth shot, cold, bracing. City lights flickered in the distance, and snow began to fall in lazy spirals. She leaned on the railing, her back rising and falling, trying not to cry in a place that had never wanted her. Then she heard the door open behind her. Damien stepped out, coatless, hands in his pockets. He kept her eyes ahead. "You shouldn't be out here. You'll freeze." "I've been colder in warmer places," he replied quietly. She turned to look at him. Something in his face had changed. The armor had cracks. "I wasn't born to this world, Isabella," she frowned. "I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment above a butcher's shop," he continued. "My mother cleaned houses. My father left before I turned 10. I was the scholarship kid, the charity case. I learned early that if I didn't become someone important, people would treat me like I was invisible." She looked at him, unsure where this was going. "So I built a wall," he said, "and then I forgot who I was." Silence settled between them, thick and intimate. "I never thought someone like you would remind me," he added. Her voice came out softer than she expected. "You mock what you fear," he nodded, "and you walk through what you shouldn't have to." The wind picked up. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Why am I really here, Damien?" His eyes searched hers. "Because you make this place feel—" She blinked. For the first time in her life, someone who had everything had just admitted he needed her for something more than a task or a service. He didn't try to touch her, didn't move closer. He just stood in the snow beside her, and together they watched the night. The snow clung to Damien's dark hair, softening the sharp edges of his perfect suit. Isabella stared at him under the soft glow of the balcony lights, unsure of what this was becoming. Inside, the music swelled again, muffled by glass doors. In here, though, in the hush of falling snow and truths finally spoken, everything felt quieter, more real. "You said I remind you of who you were," Isabella finally said, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "Oh, brilliant." "I didn't come here to fix you, I know," Damien replied. "I don't want you to." She turned her head slightly, brows pinched. "Then what do you want from me?" His breath lingered in the air. "Honesty. I don't know. At first I was curious. Then I was impressed. Now I'm afraid that if you walk away, this version of me, this better version, walks away too." Isabella didn't respond. Not with words, a flicker in her eyes that said, "I've heard too many empty things dressed as sincerity." She didn't trust him. Not yet. And part of him admired her more for that. When they returned to the party, it was different. She stood taller. Not because the crowd had changed, but because she no longer cared if it had. Damien stayed close, but not possessively. Not like a man staking claim, but like someone respecting space. protecting it. He introduced her to a foreign investor from Paris. She slipped into French like second nature, translating not just language but tone and nuance. Damien watched, almost proud. She is exceptional. Damien smiled faintly. Oh, Isis? Yes, I know. The night faded. Isabella changed back into her coat, the delicate dress wrapped in tissue paper. She stood in the lobby, waiting for the car he'd ordered for her, ready to go back to her reality. Adrienne appeared beside her. You didn't have to send a card, she said. I didn't want you waiting in the cold. She nodded. Thank you for earlier. For which part? For not letting them laugh at me? Even if you were tempted to, he hesitated. I didn't bring you here for entertainment, Isabella. I brought you here because I wanted you to see the world you belong in. She raised a brow. And which one is that? He smiled, not arrogant this time, but almost tender. Whichever one you choose. Her car pulled up. She opened the door and paused. I still don't trust you, she said, sliding in. I'd be more worried if you did, he answered, as the door closed. Inside the car, Isabella sat with her hands in her lap, heart pounding, not from shame this time, but something worse. The memory of his voice saying, you make this place feel less hollow, and the terrifying possibility that he meant it back in her apartment. She folded the dress carefully and placed it in the closet like a relic. She touched the fabric once before closing the door. For all its silk and shine, it couldn't answer the question that kept echoing in her mind. Why her? She had no money, no pedigree, no power. She swept corners and scrubbed sinks. So why did a man like Damien Blackwood look at her like she was the only one in the room who mattered? The next morning she expected the spell to break. For him to go cold again, for the games to resume. But he didn't avoid her. After a couple minutes, he greeted her at the elevator with 2 coffees. You're not my assistant, she said, as he held one out. Read 2 contracts, 2 heated arguments, and a logistics chart yesterday. I figured the least I could do was bring caffeine. She took the cup, lips twitching. What now? She asked. Now we keep pretending it's just about language. And when it's not, then we'll have to speak the hardest one. She tilted her head. Which is? He stepped into the elevator, doors closing between them as he said, but when the elevator opened again on her floor, she was still holding the coffee and still thinking about snowflakes and silence and the man who'd once mocked her, but now stood beside her in the cold like he'd never leave. The video had been online for less than 12 hours, and already Isabella's face had become a meme. A still frame from the gala, Damien staring at her in that moment of quiet awe, was plastered on gossip blogs and private company chats. The caption? When the CEO falls for the janitor, she had ignored it at first, thinking it would pass. But then came the whispers. The way conversations abruptly stopped when she entered a room. Isabella sat in the janitorial closet, the one place where fluorescent lights didn't sting like judgment. She scrolled through her cracked phone screen until she reached the video again. The camera had captured her glancing nervously at Damien, then cutting to his expression, soft, almost vulnerable voices behind her. But Isabella didn't hear any of it. All she saw was the smirk on Damien's face in the video, frozen like a taunt. It didn't matter that the look had felt real to her. Online, it was twisted into something humiliating, proof that she had dared to step out of place. She was tired, pretending not to care, constantly having to prove she deserved to breathe in the same space as them. Damien slammed the office door shut. His assistant tried to speak, but he waved her off. Where is she? He demanded. She didn't show up today, the assistant stammered. She sent an email. Effective immediately, the word stunned him. He opened his inbox and found it brief, emotionless, unsigned. I resign effect today. Please send any final paperwork to my address. Thank you, that was it. Explanation, no goodbye, no fight. Damien stood frozen, gripping the mouse in his hand like it might answer the questions rushing through his head. Had the video humiliated her that deeply? Had he pushed too far? He had brought her into that world, dressed her in elegance, stood beside her, defended her. And still she'd left without a word. Shouldn't have mattered, but it did. In her lap, an envelope addressed to Damien rested quietly. Inside was the only piece of truth she could afford to leave him. She didn't have the strength to face him, not after how the world had turned her into a punchline. She remembered the comments under the video. Gold digger much? Guess you don't need a degree when you've got a mop and a tight dress. The same city that ignored her while she scrubbed its floors now mocked her for daring to stand in the light. She pressed the letter to her chest one last time, before sliding it under the door of the penthouse concierge. No return address, just his name written in careful strokes. Damien found the envelope the next morning, tucked into his mail by mistake. He opened it and unfolded the letter, expecting anger or demands, but it wasn't either. It was something else entirely. I never wanted your salary, or your spotlight, or your guilt. I translated your words because I loved language. I showed up because someone had to pay rent. I stood beside you at that party because you asked me to, but I didn't realize I had become a spectacle. I didn't realize I was entertainment until everyone else laughed. So, I'm leaving before I disappear. I was never trying to impress you, I just wanted to survive. There was no signature, just the sting of truth written across every line. Damien folded the letter carefully and leaned back in his chair. The first time in years, he felt something shatter quietly inside him. Isabella, age 17, standing on a university stage, her scholarship acceptance letter clutched in one hand, and her mother's lab results in the other. Lights warmed her face as they called her name, but her eyes drifted to the text message. Stage 4. Immediate care needed. She had a choice, dues or duty. She chose duty. She turned down the scholarship that could change everything and took a job cleaning offices to keep her mother alive just a little longer. She never regretted it. Until now, Damien stood by the window overlooking the city. A storm was rolling in, clouds heavy with unshed rain. He thought of her walking through these streets, faithless in a crowd. No chauffeur, no assistant, only fire and dignity. Same fire that had once burned through his own veins. He remembered being 16 and hungry, hiding bruises from a drunken father, clenching his fists until he learned how to rise. He had just forgotten what it was like to burn for something worth protecting. And now he realized. The Bentley coasted through the city, but Damien didn't notice the rain drumming against the windshield. "Where to now, sir?" the driver asked cautiously. "Park Row, near 8th, Damien said without looking up. She mentioned once that her mother used to grow jasmine in a window box there. The driver hesitated but nodded. Damien clenched the letter in his coat pocket. Every line echoed inside him like a scream he hadn't listened to in time. When they reached the neighborhood, it was a far cry from the polished glass of his skyscraper. The buildings here leaned into each other, tired and weather-worn, like survivors clinging for balance. He stepped out, ignoring the puddle at his feet, and climbed the crumbling stairs of the apartment she had mentioned once. In passing, like a secret she wasn't sure he'd ever remember. "Is nothing?" "Nothing," funally, an elderly neighbor peeked through the cracked door across the hall. "You looking for Isa?" "Yes," he said quickly. "Do you know where she is?" "She left 2 days ago, packed light, said she was done with pretending." Whatever that meant. Damien's heart sank. He turned away, the hall spinning like the storm outside. At a community center across town, Isabella sat at a folding table, helping a child sound out Spanish vowels. Her hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. She hadn't been sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. If she missed him or missed the version of herself she had started to believe in around him, the one who didn't flinch at shadows, teaching, cleaning, listening, for part of her knew she was hiding something. Her best friend, Lena, leaned in. "You know he's looking for you." Isabella stiffened. "He showed up here yesterday, waited out front. You were inside and didn't even notice." Isabella didn't speak. "You're allowed to love someone who hurt you, Isa. It just means you're human." "I'm not afraid of love," she whispered. "I'm afraid of losing myself again." That night, Damien sat alone in his penthouse office, the city glowing beneath him. Letter was on the desk. Again, he'd read it so many times he could recite it. But what haunted him wasn't the words, it was what she didn't say. He hadn't accused him, hadn't cursed him, because he allowed the world around him to do it for him. He had let her be mocked, let silence answer when she needed a shield. He picked up his phone and began to write. Not an email, not a message. On April 9th, next morning, the business world woke to a rare front-page op-ed in the Financial Times. It was signed Damien Blackwood, CEO, son of a janitor, and a man who forgot his roots. This is not about a woman who worked for me. This is about the systems we protect that destroy the dignity of people like her. Her name is Isabella. She speaks 6 languages, cared for a dying mother, and chose survival over comfort. And I let the world make her into a headline. I'm ashamed, not of loving her, but of not deserving to. The piece went viral within hours because of the scandal, but because of its raw, unpolished truth. Isabella read it in the break room between classes. Her hands trembled, not because of the words, but because of how real they felt. Wasn't the Damien who smirked at her like a game, was the boy who had once starved to pay tuition. The man who had once held her eyes like they were worth gold. He didn't know what to do with the ache in her chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was longing. Even if she went back not to him, but to the building, she stood in front of the glass doors of Blackwood Enterprises and looked up at the name in steel letters. This place had once made her feel invisible. It was just a place. She walked through the lobby. Everyone stared, but she kept her head high. The elevator, she paused, then walked past it straight to the janitor's closet. Old uniform still hung there, folded. Undisturbed, she didn't take it with her. She closed the door, turned, and walked out the front doors one last time. Damien sat at the bench near Central Park, watching the city lights flicker like tiny promises. He didn't know what would happen next. He had no grand plan, no business strategy, a silence in the memory of a woman who had reminded him what it meant to care. Uncle huddled across, no makeup, no armor. Just her. She didn't speak, and neither did he. She simply sat beside him, and in the quiet between them, something fragile returned. Trust, but the willingness to rebuild it. It was a rainy Monday when Isabella first saw him again. She had just finished wiping down the pastry case at the corner bakery when the bell above the door jingled. She didn't look up right away. She was tired, flour-dusted, and already halfway through a double shift. But something in the room changed. The quiet murmur of the other customers dipped. She glanced up, and there he was, Damien Blackwood, hair damp from the rain, dark suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it, no assistant, no chauffeur, no arrogance in sight. Just him. Her breath caught. Not because she still felt anything, but because he had the nerve to show up here, at her job, after everything but gravel smoothed down. She didn't respond. She simply rang him up, handed him his coffee, and walked away. Next day, he came back. "You can stop pretending," she hissed, her voice low as she stacked muffins behind the glass. "Whatever guilt trip this is, it's not working." "I'm not pretending," Damien replied, eyes meeting hers gently. "I just didn't know how else to be near you." The words made her freeze for half a second, but she hardened. "You don't get to be near me anymore." He didn't argue. He simply sipped his coffee and left, she asked as he rolled up his sleeves and began mopping the bakery floor. "Helping?" he said. "Unless you've trademarked the act of scrubbing tiles." Her glare was ice, but he kept showing up, sweeping, wiping, making deliveries to elderly regulars. He never pushed, never brought up their past, just stayed close enough to be noticed, but far enough to respect her distance. Figure out if in nearly 3 weeks, Isabella cracked. He was stacking chairs when she asked, "Why are you really here?" He didn't miss a beat, "Because I was a selfish man who finally realized what humility costs." She blinked. "And you think helping mop floors fixes that?" "No," he said quietly, "but it's a start." They sat outside after closing, legs stretched, sharing leftover tarts in silence. Damien turned to her. "I didn't just come to apologize. I came to tell you the truth I should have said at the start." Isabella stiffened. "Go on." "I was born with nothing," he said. "Single mother, junk job after junk job. I fought like hell to become someone powerful, someone untouchable. And I succeeded. But somewhere along the way, I started measuring worth by status and forgetting where I came from." His voice cracked slightly. "When I met you, you reminded me who I used to be. Fierce, brilliant, fighting every day just to survive. I wasn't trying to impress you," she said. "I was trying to survive." "I know," he whispered. Was a beat of quiet between them. "I can't offer you the past," Damien said, "but I can offer something else." She raised an eyebrow. "I want you to lead a new initiative. Language and translation training across our global offices. Real pay, full title, your own team, no pity jet recognition." Isabella stared at him. "You want me to work for you again?" "I want to work with you. If you'll let me," she stood. "Good night, Damien." 10%. For the next morning, she received an envelope. On the quiet Friday morning, she received an envelope. On the flip side of the page was a deed her mother's old apartment building, the one that had been sold after her passing. Isabella's heart pounded as she read the second sheet. It was a proposal for a woman's literacy and language center, fully funded, staffed, dedicated in her mother's name. The Lucia Center for Learning was no signature smoothly. Things don't need words. Her hands trembled. The night she walked past the building, lights were already on. Through the window, she saw a circle of women, immigrants, elders, young mothers, reading books aloud together, smiling. Learning, she turned and walked away, with tears stinging her eyes, but her heart didn't walk away. A few days later, Isabella returned to the building, not to spy this time, but to step inside, her shoes echoing softly against the freshly polished floors. Gone were the cracked tiles and peeling paint. In their place, a calm, warm space filled with bookshelves, worn sofas, and softly humming fans. The scent of coffee and fresh paper lingered in the air. At the front desk, a young woman smiled. "Welcome to the Lucia Center. First time here?" Isabella hesitated. "Just visiting." She wandered the halls, finding familiar memories in unfamiliar rooms. Her mother had lived in apartment 3B. Now it was a reading lounge with floor cushions and children's books in 5 languages. She closed her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed. Then she turned and quietly left. He didn't speak at first, just handed her a paper bag, opened it, and found a jar of honey. Her mother's favorite. "I found the vendor you used to buy from," he said softly. "She remembered you." Isabella clutched the jar tightly, her throat too full for words. He didn't push, she just stood beside her as the city moved around them. Next day, she found a manila folder left near her locker at work. Inside were blueprints, budgets, program proposals, even interviews with educators. At the bottom, a sticky note. "This is yours. I'm just the paperwork." She folded the folder shut and tucked it under her arm. The first time in weeks, she smiled. By the end of the month, the Literacy Center was up and running and busy. Isabella had taken no official title, but everyone knew who made it what it was. Damien showed up only once, at the opening. He stayed at the back, letting her lead the ribbon cutting, watching as she welcomed families and children and women who had once thought doors like these would never open for them. "Words change lives," Isabella said for a minute. After the event, he approached her. "I have one last question." She folded her arms. "Make it count." Damien took a breath. "What would it take for you to give me a second chance? Not at business, not at fixing things, just with you." She looked at him, really looked at him. "We're no designer suits now, no smug smirk, just a man." "Then, I'll wait." And he did. "And Isabella," she began, to breathe again. After a class ended, she found Damien waiting outside again, leaning against a lamp post with a satchel in hand. "I thought you might like this," he said, offering her a slim book. She turned it over. It was a French-English poetry volume. Her eyes flicked up. He smiled softly. "We never did finish that translation you started the first day." She opened the marked page. Stanza read, "To find love in silence, to know truth in eyes, this is how we rebuild what the world breaks." Isabella's voice shook as she read it aloud. She finished. He whispered, "May I walk you home?" She nodded, walked in silence through the quiet neighborhood, past corner stores and children chalking on sidewalks. Isabella's voice stopped. "Good night, Isabella." She looked up at him. "No more games?" she asked. "None," he promised. "Then," she whispered, "good night, Damien." But as she stepped inside, she left the door cracked, just a little hope to find its way in. A gray tension loomed over the Blackwood boardroom like a storm cloud about to break. Faces once composed and confident were now taut with anxiety. Headlines flashed across screens on every wall. Blackwood emerged a couple of hours ago, laborious and ablaze in step. In translation of employment clauses in a French-speaking partner company had led to a scandal. Worse, it suggested Blackwood Global had knowingly signed off on unethical contracts. Damien stood at the head of the table, jaw clenched, his voice low. "We fixed this, now." The board members exchanged helpless looks. Their best legal team was lost in translation. Apologies were being butchered. Foreign partners had walked out of the last negotiation. Protesters had gathered outside the Paris satellite office. Time was bleeding out. One executive cleared his throat. "We need someone who doesn't just speak French. We need someone who understands the culture, the nuance." Damien's mind leapt, not to his overpriced consultants, but to a woman with a soft voice sharper than any blade in the room, the one who once made him look foolish with her quiet confidence. "Isabella," he walked out of the boardroom without a word. The bakery. Isabella was kneading dough when she saw the familiar black car pull up again. She sighed, wiping flour from it. she murmured to her coworker, who peeked through the window with wide eyes. Amula stepped inside, his suit immaculate, his face unreadable, but there was urgency in the way he moved. He didn't speak right away. He placed a manila folder on the counter. "We're drowning," he said quietly. "And you're the only one who can pull us up." Isabella looked down at the folder, frowning. "I need someone fluent, not just in language, but in trust. They won't listen to anyone else." She didn't open it. "Do you think after everything, I owe you this?" "No," he said without flinching. "I think you're the only person who would do it anyway, because you're not like the rest of us." That made her pause. She opened the folder, and what she saw turned her stomach. Dozens of pages, unpaid wages, silence complaints, mistranslations that protected corporations instead of people. "You let this happen?" Damien's face hardened. "I didn't know, but that's no excuse. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to help stop the bleeding before it. Give me 48 hours and stay out of my way." Inside a sleek Parisian negotiation hall, Isabella stood tall in a modest navy suit. Her voice was clear, crisp, and layered with calm authority as she addressed the union leaders, flanked by lawyers and reporters. "I'm not here to speak for Mr. Blackwood. I'm here to speak for the workers who were silenced by a pen they couldn't read." Every word she translated, every clause, every cultural nuance, her presence shifted the room's temperature. Executives who had once scoffed leaned forward. Workers who had once stormed out returned to the table. When accusations flared, she didn't flinch. She answered each with precision, empathy, and logic. By the end of the day, she had unraveled the mess Damien's company had made and rewoven it into a tentative truce. French labor union representatives shook her hand. "If all your bosses listened to people like you, the world might bleed less." Isabella bowed her head. "They don't listen, but I speak louder now." Back in New York, Damien stood at the top-floor window, watching the sun sink between glass towers. His phone buzzed. Isabella had returned. He rushed downstairs, but she was already waiting in the courtyard garden, where weeks ago he had watched her walk away. She turned as he approached. "You saved us," he said quietly. "No," she replied, folding her arms. "I saved them," he nodded. "I know. That's why She cut him off. "You want to thank me? You want to offer me something?" He paused. "I want you. I don't care if you'd ever take a job with me again. I don't care if you hate the company. I just want to see you in my life, in my quietest places, not as a test or a challenge, but as peace." Her eyes shimmered for a brief second, but her voice stayed firm. "Words are easy, Damien. I know." She stepped closer. "I listen to actions," he nodded again. "Then let me show you." Slowly and without expectation, she searched his face and for the first time found no arrogance, no games, just a man trying, awkwardly and earnestly. "I'll watch," she said. "Not because I trust you, but because I want to." The next few weeks passed without grand gestures or bold declarations. Damien didn't send flowers. He didn't arrive with gifts or promises. He showed up quietly and consistently. On Monday, he volunteered at the Women's Literacy Center, painting walls and hauling books. He didn't take photos. He didn't make announcements. He just worked, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow. Isabella stood across the room one afternoon, watching him scrub graffiti from the back hallway. He looked so out of place, yet strangely at ease. When he caught her glance, he simply nodded. Not a word spoken, just a man who meant what he said. On Wednesday, he slipped an envelope under the center's door. Inside were signed documents ending all exploitative contracts in Blackwood Global's overseas branches, along with handwritten letters of apology translated into the native languages of every affected worker. Isabella read each one, line by line. They weren't perfect, but they were real. On Friday, he attended her evening literacy class. He sat quietly in the back, struggling to read a children's French book aloud. The other women giggled. So did Isabella. And for a moment, something softened again. It wasn't some fairy tale transformation, it was something rarer. Humility, earned slowly. The bakery was closed. Isabella had stayed behind to inventory the shelves. The streets were slick with rain when the door chimed. Damien stood in the entry, soaked to the skin, no umbrella, hair clinging to his forehead. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said breathlessly. "You look like a soggy mop." He laughed once. "It's been a mop kind of day." She walked around the counter slowly, arms folded. "Why are you here like this?" I just came from a shareholder meeting. They voted unanimously to shift our foreign policy protocol based on your reform proposal. Her eyes widened. They listened because of you. She said nothing for a moment, then nodded. Then maybe some of this was worth it. He reached into he said quietly, not for a board, not for press, just for you. She hesitated, then took it. Page was soaked at the corners, but the ink held. I once mocked someone for the languages they carry quietly in their soul. You translated not just my words, but my ignorance. You showed me that fluency means nothing without integrity. You were never beneath me. I was always trying to catch up to you. Isabella's throat tightened. You never needed to say all this, she whispered. But I did, because now I understand the weight of silence. The next morning, Isabella sat on the rooftop of her old apartment complex, the same place she used to cry after long shifts scrubbing floors. The air was different now, clean. Brighter, her friend Nora joined her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. You're thinking about him, Nora said without preamble. Is it that obvious? You've been sighing into your toast for a week. They sipped quietly. You always said people can't change, Nora added after a beat. I still believe that. In what's this? Isabella looked down at the steaming cup between her hands. Maybe it's not about changing who someone is, she said slowly. Maybe it's about choosing who they become next to you. That weekend, Damien stood in the garden outside the literacy center. He had been watering the newly planted flowers, dirt under his nails. Isabella approached him slowly, the sun casting a golden light across the space. You're going to kill that poor hydrangea, she said. I think it's trying to sue me for overwatering. She laughed softly, kneeling beside him. They worked in silence for a while, pulling weeds and trimming edges. Last, she stood, brushing dirt from her hand. I'm not coming back to Blackwood Global, she said. I figured there were anything but influential people here. He looked up at her, eyes searching. Then what are you saying? She reached into her pocket and held out a key. To the reading room, she said. It locks weird. Thought you might help keep it open sometimes. Damien blinked, then smiled. Slowly, genuinely. Wasn't a contract, it wasn't a promise, it was something real. Izzy and at last was enough. That day forward, they worked side by side, never defining what they were, only knowing what they felt. World would talk, world always did, but Damien didn't care about boardrooms anymore. He cared about showing up with clean hands, with no expectations, and a heart finally worth translating. Isabella, she no longer walked with her head down. She worked forward. The sun had long dipped below the skyline when Isabella turned the final lock on her apartment door. The hallway light flickered overhead, casting a tired glow on the package lying neatly on her doormat. It was wrapped in craft paper, tied with a red ribbon. Unexpected, elegant, and anonymous. He looked both ways down the corridor before bending down to pick it up. It wasn't heavy, but there was a strange stillness. Back inside, she peeled the paper back slowly, careful not to tear it. What she found stopped her breath. Was a framed, simple walnut wood, smooth to the touch. Inside was the full French passage Damien had challenged her with on the day they first spoke, the one that had launched everything. Beneath it, typed in sharp ink and centered in cursive, were the words, "You saw me before I saw myself." Her fingers traced the curve of each letter, her throat tightened. She remembered the sting of that moment, the humiliation, the surprise on his face when she translated it perfectly. But now, that memory burned differently, not like shame, like origin. She stood motionless for a while, the apartment quiet except for the hum of her old refrigerator. Then she placed the frame gently on the counter, threw on her coat, and ran. It was late, cold, the kind of night that whipped the city into shadows and silhouettes. But she didn't care. Her boots splashed through shallow puddles, hair whipping around her face. Her destination was clear, rooftop of the Blackwood Tower, where she used to clean windows, a place where she often stood alone, whispering French phrases to herself as the city blinked awake below. Psiag knew PF the elevator to work for her anymore, but when she reached the ground floor of the towering building, the night security guard just nodded. He's been waiting, he said. At Billiden Hef and her doors opened at the top floor. A rush of wind hit her face. The rooftop door stood open, rain sweeping across the cement like a restless tide. And there he was, Damien soaked in rain, suit jacket off, hair clinging to his forehead but standing tall, exactly where she used to scrub the glass near the edge. No umbrellas, no shield, just him and the storm. She stepped out slowly, her breath catching with every step. He turned. His eyes met hers, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He reached into his pocket. Wasn't some velvet box, no grand display, just his bare, rain-wet hand holding a small silver band. Modest, unpolished. Real. I know this doesn't fix what I've broken, Damien began, voice cracking through the wind, but I'm not here to fix you or earn you. I'm here to tell you something I should have said a long time ago. She didn't move, but her eyes didn't leave his. He continued, his voice raw. You once said you listened to actions. I've tried, Isabella, not with buildings or titles, but by choosing differently. Every day, choosing not to control, not to chase the ring isn't for what you did. It's not for saving my company or translating a line I used to mock you. It's not for the way you walked away with dignity when I least deserved it. It's for who you are when no one's looking. He knelt slowly, one knee on the wet rooftop floor, water pooling around him. I'm not asking you to forget, he said. I'm asking if you'll choose me, not because I'm safe, not because I've changed, but because you want to. The wind howled. Isabella stared down at him, rain dripping from her eyelashes. Her hands were shaking. Her heart thudded wildly inside her chest. Every insult, every doubt, every moment, he'd left her vulnerable. And yet, every gesture since then, every quiet act of remorse, every time he showed up without expecting a reward, those too lived in her. Knelt too, not beside him, and took the ring from his hand. I don't want perfect, she whispered. I just want honest. Damien closed his eyes, tears indistinguishable from the rain. And then, slowly, carefully, she slid the ring onto her own finger. They weren't a kiss, no doubt. They stayed there, kneeling in the rain, their foreheads pressed together, hands wrapped around each other's. No music, just the storm bearing witness. And that, Isabella thought, was enough. The rain softened, shifting from a downpour to a rhythmic patter, as though the sky itself had exhaled. Still kneeling on the rooftop, Isabella leaned back just enough to look at Damien. For the first time, she didn't see the cold, calculated CEO who once humiliated her. She saw a man stripped of power, pride, and armor. And still standing, Isabella brushed a strand from his forehead. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She led him to the old utility bench near the edge of the rooftop. It was where she used to leave her cleaning supplies, sometimes a thermos of tea. They sat, shoulder to shoulder, overlooking the blurred city skyline below. But Damien finally broke the silence. Something else I need to tell you, she turned to him. I wasn't just cruel that day. I was afraid. You walked in, and for the first time, someone didn't care about my name. You looked at me like I wasn't above you, like I could be small and still be seen. I hated it. Then I missed it. He took a breath. I thought the more I did to fix things, the more you'd want me. But you didn't want grand gestures. You wanted presence, consistency, the kind no amount of money can buy. Isabella's voice was soft. Because love without respect is control. Damien nodded slowly. I see that now. They sat for a while, letting the city carried on, cars honking, distant sirens echoing, life pulsing through the veins of steel and concrete. Up here, though, time moved differently. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out. A faded paper. She unfolded it carefully and handed it to him. It was a letter. Her letter. The one she left in her apartment months ago when she resigned. He glanced at her, hesitant, then read aloud, I was never trying to impress you. I just wanted to survive. I cleaned your floors, learned your languages, stood still while others walked through doors I couldn't even knock on. Even then I never hated you. I hated how much I wanted you to see me. Not as a cleaner, not as a girl with perfect grammar, but just me. Damien lowered the paper. His eyes glistened. I read this 100 times, but hearing you say it now, I didn't say it then, she interrupted gently. I'm saying it now. He looked at her, confused. I wanted you to see me, Isabella continued, but more than that, I wanted to see if you'd stay when I didn't give you a script, when I didn't say what you wanted to hear. And did I? Damien asked, tentative. She nodded, lips trembling. Eventually, Damien exhaled, the sound shaky, like a man who had been holding his breath for months. She laughed, quietly, unexpectedly. You know what's ridiculous? What? You still owe me your salary? Damien blinked, then broke into the kind of laugh she hadn't heard from him before. Unguarded, breathless, human. I was hoping you forgot, she said, but I'll settle for something else. He raised an eyebrow. Name it. She took his hand. Truth. Every day. Even when it's messy. He nodded solemnly. Deal. They stood again, the wind drying the rain from their coats as the clouds thinned. The storm had passed. Below, streetlights blinked gold against puddles. In the glass of the tower behind them, their reflections shimmered faintly. Two figures standing together, no longer on opposite ends of power or pride, but eye to eye. In the descent of the stairs, Damien paused. You know, I had this whole speech planned, something about stars and soulmates. I scrapped it. Good, she said. I prefer the rain. She smiled at him, then added, but if you ever try to test my French again, I'll throw a dictionary at your head. He laughed. I wouldn't dare. Back inside, they walked through the building in silence. No assistants, no polished marble shoes or clinking of champagne glasses. Just them. Damien stopped near the reception desk. I had this place redesigned after you left, he said. She looked around. Walls were lined with new panels, soft wood, warmer lights, but what caught her attention was the framed inscription above the elevator. Dignity doesn't come from titles. It comes from standing tall even when others look down. She stared at it, stunned. That's from the essay I left on your desk. No, he said. I read it 100 times. She turned to him, eyes wide. I never forgot your words, Damien added, his voice low. Even when I was pretending they didn't matter. Her hand reached for his, and he held it tightly, their fingers interlacing like puzzle pieces finally finding their match. They stepped out into the night, no crowd. Just wet pavement and the sound of footsteps, two side by side. To feed in both hopes of life. Since they met, there was no imbalance, no challenge, no test. Only truth, and the choice to keep choosing each other again and again. The morning air carried the scent of fresh paint and jasmine as Isabella stood on the rooftop where she had once washed windows before dawn. Now, instead of a bucket and squeegee, she held a bundle of papers, plans, dreams, and the final approval forms for the Veritas Foundation. Behind her, the newly restored building shimmered with light. It bore a simple sign above its entrance, the Veritas Foundation, where language becomes legacy. Below, a line of women, some young, some older, all determined, waited with nervous energy to enter. They came from shelters, from community homes, from kitchens and laundromats, drawn by the promise of education, dignity, and a second chance. Isabella exhaled slowly, overwhelmed not by nerves but by quiet awe. This place had once been her mother's crumbling apartment complex, one she had fought so hard to keep. And now, brick by brick, it had become something else entirely. A home for knowledge, a shelter for voices long silenced, a monument built not in marble, but in memory. Damien appeared at her side, dressed casually for once, his suit jacket replaced by a soft white shirt and rolled-up sleeves. He carried 2 steaming cups of café au lait. Couldn't let you conquer your first day alone, he said, pressing one into her hand. She smiled faintly. You remembered? I remember everything, he said, touching the corner of her paper stack where her mother's signature once appeared on an old deed. Including what this place means. They stood in silence for a moment, letting the wind carry their Then the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, young volunteers arriving, the hum of life waking up in the building. Do you want to say something to them? He asked. Isabella hesitated. No speech today, just work. But she turned to him, eyes shining with a softness that hadn't existed in her before, not until he'd broken through the last of her defenses. This foundation isn't about us, she said, bitch of women who was told she wasn't enough. Because she scrubbed floors instead of sitting at a desk. Because her accent wasn't polished. Because her knowledge wasn't certified. We can't fix everything, but we can open a door. Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was an old, worn coin. French, the same kind her mother used to collect when she cleaned embassy halls. She used to say, "This was luck," he murmured, placing it in her palm. Ella closed her hand over it. She was wrong, it's choice. Later that day the ceremony began, but it wasn't a gala. No press, no investors, just a small private rooftop wedding beneath the open. Strings of light crisscrossed the beams, casting a soft, golden glow. The rooftop garden, once neglected, had bloomed. A few potted herbs from her mother's windowsill still grew there, tended by Isabella's quiet hands over the months. Her wedding dress was modest but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves. Her hair was pinned simply, with no veil. She carried no bouquet, just a folded letter tucked into her hand. Across the rooftop, Damien waited. He wore a charcoal vest and slacks, no tie, his nerves hidden behind his usual calm, but his eyes betrayed everything. As soft violin music began, Isabella walked forward slowly. Her steps weren't rehearsed or ceremonial, they were sure. Each one said, "I am not here because you rescued me. I am here because I chose to meet you where you finally saw me." She reached him. They stood in front of the small circle of witnesses, some from the foundation, some from their pasts. Her best friend, Rosa, held a candle in one hand and a small box in the other. Damien's younger sister, once estranged, had flown in from abroad just to be there. Instead of traditional vows, they each unfolded a letter. Damien went first. He took a breath and began, in fluent French. His voice shook only slightly. "You saw me before I saw myself, bored. I met you, I thought I was testing you, but every word you translated was a mirror, not of language, but of my own cowardice." Isabella's eyes didn't leave his face. "You challenged everything I thought made me powerful," he continued, "and when you walked away, I realized power meant nothing if I had no one who dared to call me out. You were never beneath me, you were always beyond me." He folded the letter. "I don't ask you to forget how we began. I only ask you to believe in how we choose to end." Isabella unfolded her letter next. She cleared her throat and began in Latin. Her voice steady, precise, she said, "is not just a word, it is a weapon, and when wielded gently, it heals." She paused, letting the silence settle around the phrase. "I came into your world with a mop and broken shoes. I left it with a broken heart, but I returned, not to be completed, but to be respected." Her hand trembled for only a second. "You listened when you didn't have to, you knelt when you didn't know how, and you stayed, not to impress me, but to learn from me." She folded her letter. "I marry you, not because you finally saw me, but because you finally saw yourself." A hush fell over the gathering. Damien stepped forward, producing a simple gold ring. "Not for what you did," he whispered, slipping it onto her finger, "but for who you are." Isabella did the same, her hand confident as she returned the gesture. "Not for what you gave," she said softly, "but for what you let go." They kissed gently under the soft rooftop lights, not as savior and saved, not as employer and employee, but as two people who had rebuilt their own meanings of strength, choice, and love. Below, the lights of the Veritas Foundation glowed brighter. But even brighter was the quiet plaque newly installed at the base of the foundation's front gate. In memory of Camila Ortega, who raised a daughter not to obey, but to... The Veritas Foundation blossomed beyond anything they had imagined. Inside its classrooms, laughter and learning merged. Women once told they were too old or too unqualified now stood at whiteboards teaching each other. Children played in a supervised corner, their mothers solving language puzzles with tutors trained by Isabella herself. And each week the hallways echoed with greetings in dozens of languages: Arabic, Vietnamese, Portuguese. Isabella moved through the building with a quiet grace, not as a figurehead, but as a mentor. She met with students individually. She taught an advanced Latin course once a week. She even returned to sweeping the stairs occasionally, out of habit, not necessity. Morning, she found a woman crying in the bathroom. New, nervous, from another city. She didn't ask for the woman. She simply handed her a small, handwritten card, read, "You are welcome, not for what you've proven, but for what you carry." Damien, for his part, worked from a humble corner office on the top floor. Gone were the glass walls, the assistants with Bluetooth earpieces, the aggressive schedules. He now spent most of his time handling logistics for the foundation or joining Isabella on field visits. He no longer referred to himself as CEO. When asked what he did, he simply said, "I build what she imagines." And what she imagined kept growing. After noon, they stood together in front of the old Blackwood corporate tower, where everything had begun. The building had been renovated and repurposed as a shared learning and innovation space, home to both the Foundation's outreach team and independent women-led startups incubated through the program. It had been Damien's idea to rename it, but Isabella chose the name together. They watched as the new letters were unveiled across the entrance arc. Camilla's center, underneath the name, a bronze plaque read, "She would have hated the attention." Damien smiled. "She'd have told us we were wasting good money on a plaque? But then," Isabella added, "she'd have made sure everyone who entered read it out loud." Later that evening, they returned to the rooftop garden, the same one where they had exchanged vows under soft lights. A few staff members gathered for a casual dinner to celebrate the launch of a new translation program for refugee women. As music played and laughter floated through the air, Isabella sat beside Damien on the bench where she used to take breaks during her cleaning shifts. "Ian almost told you, the day you marked me. I almost quit." He didn't flinch. "I know." She turned to face him, serious now. "I didn't stay because of you. I stayed because I knew who I was, and I wasn't going to let your ignorance change that." "I'm glad you didn't," he said quietly. "Because every good thing since started with that choice." Isabella laughed softly, then looked up at the stars. "It's strange. I used to think survival was enough, that if I just got through the day, I was winning. And now?" he asked. "Now," she said, "I want more than survival. I want significance." The next morning, they walked hand in hand past a mural being painted on the side of the Camilla Center. It showed a woman in a janitor's uniform holding an open book, from which spilled words in many languages: Latin, French, Vietnamese, Arabic, Spanish. The mural's base were the words, "Language doesn't define your worth, it reveals your courage." The painter, a graduate of the Foundation's first class, looked over and grinned. "Almost done," she said. "Just need the signature." "Yours," Isabella insisted. Your mother's blinked. "Mine?" "You're the one who made this real," Damien added. "It's your voice now." They stepped back as she signed the bottom corner, her name trembling in fresh paint. Isabella pulled out an old notebook, her mother's scribbled translations from years ago, notes written beside mock schedules, half-finished poems in Spanish, dreams no one else had ever seen. She flipped to a blank page and began writing. "The building has windows that shine, without me, but my name is in the light anyway. Once thought silence was strength. Now I know truth is louder. Don't rise when others lift us. We rise when we stop apologizing for standing tall." She closed the notebook and placed it in the glass case in the Foundation's entrance. Visitors passed it daily, some not noticing, others paused, some cried. One young girl asked, "Who wrote this?" And the staff member answered, "A woman who spoke 7 languages, but taught the world one word that mattered." "Which word?" the girl asked. Staff member smiled gently. "Veritas." The morning air carried the scent of fresh paint and jasmine as Isabella stood on the rooftop where she had once washed windows before dawn. Now, instead of a bucket and squeegee, she held a bundle of papers, plans, dreams, and the final approval forms for the Veritas Foundation. Behind her, the newly restored building shimmered with light. It bore a simple sign above its entrance, the Veritas Foundation, where language becomes legacy. Below, a line of women, some young, some older, all determined, waited with nervous energy to enter. They came from shelters, from community homes, from kitchens and laundromats, drawn by the promise of education, dignity, and a second chance. Isabella exhaled slowly, overwhelmed not by nerves but by quiet awe. This place had once been her mother's crumbling apartment complex, one she had fought so hard to keep. And now, brick by brick, it had become something else entirely. A home for knowledge, a shelter for voices long silenced, a monument built not in marble, but in memory. Damien appeared at her side, dressed casually for once, his suit jacket replaced by a soft white shirt and rolled-up sleeves. He carried 2 steaming cups of café au lait. "Couldn't let you conquer your first day alone," he said, pressing one into her hand. She smiled faintly. "You remembered?" "I remember everything," he said, touching the corner of her paper stack where her mother's signature once appeared on an old deed. "Including what this place means." They stood in silence for a moment, letting the wind carry their Then the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, young volunteers arriving, the hum of life waking up in the building. "Do you want to say something to them?" he asked. Isabella hesitated. "No speech today, just work." But she turned to him, eyes shining with a softness that hadn't existed in her before, not until he'd broken through the last of her defenses. "This foundation isn't about us," she said, bitch of women who was told she wasn't enough. Because she scrubbed floors instead of sitting at a desk. Because her accent wasn't polished. Because her knowledge wasn't certified. "We can't fix everything, but we can open a door." Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, It was an old, worn coin. French, the same kind her mother used to collect when she cleaned embassy halls. She used to say, "This was luck," he murmured, placing it in her palm. Ella closed her hand over it. She was wrong, it's choice. Later that day the ceremony began, but it wasn't a gala. No press, no investors, just a small private rooftop wedding beneath the open. Strings of lights crisscrossed the beams, casting a soft, golden glow. The rooftop garden, once neglected, had bloomed. A few potted herbs from her mother's windowsill still grew there, tended by Isabella's quiet hands over the months. Her wedding dress was modest but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves. Her hair was pinned simply, with no veil. She carried no bouquet, just a folded letter tucked into her hand. Across the rooftop, Damien waited. He wore a charcoal vest and slacks, no tie, his nerves hidden behind his usual calm. But his eyes betrayed everything. As soft violin music began, Isabella walked forward slowly. Her steps weren't rehearsed or ceremonial, they were sure. Each one said, "I am not here because you rescued me. I am here because I chose to meet you where you finally saw me." She reached him. They stood in front of the small circle of witnesses, some from the foundation, some from their pasts. Her best friend, Rosa, held a candle in one hand and a small box in the other. Damien's younger sister, once estranged, had flown in from abroad just to be there. Instead of traditional vows, they each unfolded a letter. Damien went first. He took a breath and began in fluent French. His voice shook only slightly. "You saw me before I saw myself, bored. I met you, I thought I was testing you, but every word you translated was a mirror, not of language, but of my own cowardice." Isabella's eyes didn't leave his face. "You challenged everything I thought made me powerful," he continued. "And when you walked away, I realized power meant nothing if I had no one who dared to call me out. You were never beneath me, you were always beyond me." He folded the letter. "I don't ask you to forget how we began. I only ask you to believe in how we choose to end." Isabella unfolded her letter next. She cleared her throat and began in Latin. Her voice steady, precise, she said, "is not just a word, it is a weapon, and when wielded gently, it heals." She paused, letting the silence settle around the phrase. "I came into your world with a mop and broken shoes. I left it with a broken heart, but I returned, not to be completed, but to be respected." Her hand trembled for only a second. "You listened when you didn't have to, you knelt when you didn't know how, and you stayed, not to impress me, but to learn from me." She folded her letter. "I marry you, not because you finally saw me, but because you finally saw yourself." A hush fell over the gathering. Damien stepped forward, producing a simple gold ring. "Not for what you did," he whispered, slipping it onto her finger, "but for who you are." Isabella did the same, her hand confident as she returned the gesture. "Not for what you gave," she said softly, "but for what you let go." They kissed gently under the soft rooftop lights, not as savior and saved, not as employer and employee, but as two people who had rebuilt their own meanings of strength, choice, and love. Below, the lights of the Veritas Foundation glowed brighter. But even brighter was the quiet plaque newly installed at the base of the foundation's front gate. In memory of Camila Ortega, who raised a daughter not to obey, but to... The Veritas Foundation blossomed beyond anything they had imagined. Inside its classrooms, laughter and learning merged. Women once told they were too old or too unqualified now stood at whiteboards teaching each other. Children played in a supervised corner, their mothers solving language puzzles with tutors trained by Isabella herself. And each week the hallways echoed with greetings in dozens of languages: Arabic, Vietnamese, Portuguese. Isabella moved through the building with a quiet grace, not as a figurehead, but as a mentor. She met with students individually. She taught an advanced Latin course once a week. She even returned to sweeping the stairs occasionally, out of habit, not necessity. Morning, she found a woman crying in the bathroom. New, nervous, from another city. She didn't ask for the woman. She simply handed her a small, handwritten card, read, "You are welcome, not for what you've proven, but for what you carry." Damien, for his part, worked from a humble corner office on the top floor. Gone were the glass walls, the assistants with Bluetooth earpieces, the aggressive schedules. He now spent most of his time handling logistics for the foundation or joining Isabella on field visits. He no longer referred to himself as CEO. When asked what he did, he simply said, "I build what she imagines." And what she imagined kept growing. Afternoon, they stood together in front of the old Blackwood corporate tower, where everything had begun. The building had been renovated and repurposed as a shared learning and innovation space, home to both the Foundation's outreach team and independent women-led startups incubated through the program. It had been Damien's idea to rename it, but Isabella chose the name together. They watched as the new letters were unveiled across the entrance arc. Camilla Center, underneath the name, a bronze plaque read, "She would have hated the attention." Damien smiled. "She'd have told us we were wasting good money on a plaque?" "But then," Isabella added, "she'd have made sure everyone who entered read it out loud." Later that evening, they returned to the rooftop garden, the same one where they had exchanged vows under soft lights. A few staff members gathered for a casual dinner to celebrate the launch of a new translation program for refugee women. As music played and laughter floated through the air, Isabella sat beside Damien on the bench where she used to take breaks during her cleaning shifts. "Ian almost told you, the day you marked me. I almost quit." He didn't flinch. "I know." She turned to face him, serious now. "I didn't stay because of you. I stayed because I knew who I was, and I wasn't going to let your ignorance change that." "I'm glad you didn't," he said quietly. "Because every good thing since started with that choice." Isabella laughed softly, then looked up at the stars. "It's strange. I used to think survival was enough, that if I just got through the day, I was winning." "And now?" he asked. "Now," she said, "I want more than survival. I want significance." The next morning, they walked hand in hand past a mural being painted on the side of the Camilla Center. It showed a woman in a janitor's uniform holding an open book, from which spilled words in many languages: Latin, French, Vietnamese, Arabic, Spanish. The mural's base were the words, "Language doesn't define your worth, it reveals your courage." The painter, a graduate of the Foundation's first class, looked over and grinned. "Almost done," she said. "Just need the signature." "Yours," Isabella insisted. Your mother's blinked. "Mine?" "You're the one who made this real," Damien added. "It's your voice now." They stepped back as she signed the bottom corner, her name trembling in fresh paint. Isabella pulled out an old notebook, her mother's scribbled translations from years ago, notes written beside mock schedules, half-finished poems in Spanish, dreams no one else had ever seen. She flipped to a blank page and began writing. "The building has windows that shine, without me, but my name is in the light anyway. Once thought silence was strength. Now I know truth is louder. Don't rise when others lift us. We rise when we stop apologizing for standing tall." She closed the notebook and placed it in the glass case in the Foundation's entrance. Visitors passed it daily, some not noticing. Others paused. Some cried. One young girl asked, "Who wrote this?" And the staff member answered, "A woman who spoke 7 languages, but taught the world one word that mattered." "Which word?" the girl asked. Staff member smiled gently. "Veritas."